The war with Iran is heating up again this week, and Israelis are on edge, waiting to see if we'll once again be running to bomb shelters in the middle of the night. The Church of England has decided to embrace the absurdly unbalanced Kairos II document, and that's not the only diplomatic setback Israel suffered recently. We'll also be paying our last respects to late U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham and looking at Israel's own domestic political drama. All that is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. I have not yet had a chance to pay my respects to the late U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who died on July 11th, just 2 days after he turned 71. He had served as a congressman and then senator from South Carolina for over 30 years and was one of Israel's best friends on Capitol Hill. But he was more than that, and since a great deal has already been said about Lindsey Graham by Israeli officials and others, I will only add my own personal reflection that he was more than the sum of his parts. He was, in fact, something that has become very rare in today's world. He was an adult. As I look at both the United States Congress and the Israeli Knesset, I am reminded in a very sad way of Isaiah chapter 3, verse 4. I will make mere youths their officials. Children will rule over them. Friends, there are no actual children in the U.S. Congress or the Israeli Knesset. If you're watching this in some other country, then you can probably tell me that there's no actual children in your elected parliamentary assemblies either. But I'm not sure I'm not the only one who has noticed that there's a lot of childish and even infantile behavior in all these assemblies. This, as well as the passing of one of the few adults in the room, Lindsey Graham, also reminds us of 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 to 2. Therefore, I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, and of course women too, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. Friends, we must be in prayer for those who are in positions of authority over our countries, our cities, our schools, our families, and our ministries. That includes prayers for health and safety of these people. And if you can spare a moment, pray for me as well. My feelings won't be hurt. Please pray for my wife Batia too, and all our team efforts and partners. Now, I didn't mean to preach a sermonette there, friends, but sometimes that's what the situation calls for. We're not done with theological and spiritual issues just yet, because our next story is about a catastrophic error being made by our brothers and sisters in the Anglican Church, or as it's also known, the Church of England. The General Synod of the Church of England met this past week and voted overwhelmingly to, as they put it, encourage engagement with the Kairos II document. If you've never heard of it, the Kairos II statement was drafted by a group of leaders of mostly Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches here in the Holy Land. It relies heavily on replacement theology to accuse the state of Israel of genocide, describing the Jewish state as a colonial enterprise built on racism and so on. It also makes excuses for the Hamas massacre of Israelis on October 7, 2023, saying that it came in response to decades of Israeli oppression. It also strongly rejects Christian support for Israel on any grounds, especially biblical grounds. Jewish groups in Britain, as well as Christian Zionist groups and a handful of mostly Protestant pastors in the United Kingdom, strongly condemned the move. Now, it needs to be pointed out that the General Synod did not vote to endorse the conclusions of the Kairos II document, nor did they vote to agree with it. They merely voted to affirm a statement that the document deserved to be, as they said, quote, heard, because it is a fair representation of the narrative that most Palestinian Christians adhere to. That's an important distinction to make, but the nuance seems to have been lost is all the angst and outrage prompted by this move the Church of England has made. However, I still think the Church of England has made a serious error, so I'll switch to commentary mode to explain why. The argument is sometimes made that both Israel and the Palestinians have legitimate grievances against the other, and that Christians should not take sides because neither side is righteous. But the God we worship makes it very clear in His Word. The Bible, Yes, the Bible, that he is on his own side. And if we call ourselves followers of his, we should be on his side too. And when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Christians are given a way to thread this needle. It comes to us from the Gospel of John chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." In the first part, Yeshua, Jesus, describes himself as the truth. And in my experience and observation, there are few things more life-changing for a Christian than to internalize that. In every situation where a Christian must decide which side to take, it is always right and never wrong to take the side of truth. The Kairos II document is filled with egregious lies, slanders, and outright heresy. By declaring that this lying, deceitful, gaslighting, and deeply hypocritical document deserves to be heard, the Church of England General Synod has taken a stance against the truth and thus against God himself. It has damaged its own legitimacy, and sadly, it's also damaged the credibility of the Bible in the eyes of pretty much everyone. If a legitimately established religious authority doesn't take its own foundational documents seriously, why should anyone else? Of course, the phenomenon of self-described Christians not taking the Bible seriously has been around for a long time, but this move by the Church of England is a pretty high-profile example of what not to do. Now, I can't end this comment without mentioning the fact that Christian supporters of Israel haven't always taken the side of truth either. Without mentioning names, I'll just say that some very high-profile Christian pastors and ministries who support Israel do so under the pretext of endorsing dual covenant theology, which is just as bad, in my opinion, as replacement theology. So, friends, we have some things to do to put our own house in order before we point the finger of accusation elsewhere. I'll say no more about that for now, and in fact, we need to switch back to news mode because the next big story is big and just keeps getting bigger all the time. I am talking, of course, about the rapidly escalating kinetic conflict between the United States and Iran, which has already engulfed several Gulf Arab countries and might soon pull in Israel as well. I have to say that when I criticized President Trump's acceptance of the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, as a basis for negotiating with the regime in Tehran, I got some pushback. This included comments to the effect that although the MOU looked bad, giving the Iranians all kinds of advantages they didn't deserve after having been so badly defeated on the battlefield, we could count on them to mess up this wonderful gift they'd received. I wasn't sure how exactly this would turn out, but it did turn out exactly how things developed. After 30 days of pointless negotiations, which were accompanied by the relaxation of sanctions on Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps did indeed fire on crude oil tankers and other ships that were attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC is demanding that all ships transiting Hormuz go through a route that's close to their own coastline, so they can blackmail and charge those ships fees for the privilege. They have stated that this is their prerogative under the MOU and established international law and customs. Now, to try and enforce their delusional mandate to control the strait, they have fired hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at oil tankers owned by several countries, as well as at U.S. military bases in Jordan, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. Now, some of those weapons missed the bases and hit civilian infrastructure, causing damage and casualties. Some missiles fired at the Jordanian port city of Aqaba last week almost hit Israel's Red Sea port city of Eilat. Even without that close call, the IDF is on high alert for a resumption of full-scale war with Iran, which has already said it's in full-scale war with the United States. Well, I would add that it seems to be at war with the entire civilized world, and even their erstwhile allies in China, Russia, and North Korea must be getting kind of tired of their nonsense by now. I hope so. But they have other allies, including the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon, both of which are avowed enemies of Israel and have fired on this country many times in the past. That is why here at Vision for Israel, we continue and we must deliver bomb safety shelters and emergency equipment and gear to communities all over the country. So if you want to know how you can help, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and please watch this short video. God bless you. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. In Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back, friends. Now, in the second half of this week's report of VFI News, I'm going to talk about something I really don't like talking about, and that's domestic Israeli politics and the economy. But I must do so for prayer. The reason I don't enjoy talking about these things much is that most of the news is not very cheerful. In fact, sometimes it can get downright depressing, and I'm afraid this week it is trending in that direction, at least for me. But let's start with some cheerful news, as last Friday the legal advisor to the Knesset announced that the term for this government has come to an end, and the Knesset needed to vote to dissolve itself and launch a new election cycle is beginning. This is the first time in a very long time that a Knesset has completed a full 4-year term without the need to call early elections. My, how time has passed. The fact that we'll have new elections on October 27th means that as imperfect as this country is, it's still a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, and it's still a free country. That's the cheerful news, and as I look around at all of Israel's neighbors, both near and far, I have to admit that it's certainly worth cheering about. However, there is some less cheerful news, and it starts with the fact that in its last few days, the outgoing Knesset passed several bills into law that were incredibly unpopular with everyone outside the ultra-Orthodox community. Many of them were immediately challenged in the courts, which acted quickly to put a restraining order on some of them. This prompted Haredi lawmakers, the ultra-Orthodox, to declare that no one should pay any attention to the courts as the people had spoken. This, of course, is only partially true, and I'm sure these Haredi lawmakers know about the damage they're already doing to the fabric of Israeli society by telling their followers to disregard the courts, which are the only check and balance on the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. I'm sure these guys know a lot of things, but for some reason they don't think those things they know are relevant, and so they're just going to keep doing whatever they think they need to do in order to push their own agenda. Speaking of which, Netanyahu himself did not vote on many of these bills, but he ordered everyone in the coalition who was going to be voting to vote in favor of their passage. This resulted in some furious pushback from some Likud lawmakers, including Yuli Edelstein, who is the most senior MK in the Likud behind Netanyahu, or anyway, he used to be. He has now announced that he is leaving the Likud to form a new party for the upcoming elections. MK Dan Iluz also resigned, posting a statement on social media that the Likud had been hijacked by special interests that cared little for the interests of Likud voters. Other Likud party officials have also resigned in the last few weeks, giving similar statements to explain their actions. Polls indicate that many rank-and-file Likud voters are also now disillusioned and considering the idea of giving their votes to someone else. So, with a bit less than 100 days until the election on October 27th, the race to decide who will be Israel's next prime minister appears to be wide open. Now, that being the case, I will not make any predictions about outcomes at this point. However, I will make some predictions about other things, starting with the economy. I think it's safe to predict that whoever wins the next round of elections, they are going to have to grapple with some very significant economic headwinds. When this ceasefire between the United States and Iran began and the price of oil immediately dropped, I warned viewers to keep doing whatever they'd been doing before to save money, use less gasoline, plant a vegetable garden if you can, and so on and so forth. I really wish I'd been overly cautious in giving that warning, but I'm afraid events have proven me just right. The current hostilities in the Strait of Hormuz is putting upward pressure on oil prices globally, and that's increasing the cost of living for people everywhere. It's also having a very serious effect on the operations of producers of many products, including basic commodities like food. Distribution of these products is also being affected because everything moves on vehicles that require oil-based fuels to operate. Now, here in Israel, we have some unique problems in this regard, such as the fact that the United States Air Force refueling planes, which were scheduled to be redeployed away from Ben Gurion Airport, are now being kept in place. This is going to have an impact on the ability of the airport to serve as a hub for civilian flights, which will have a ripple effect on Israel's entire civilian economy. The tourism industry, for instance, which is traditionally a major engine of Israel's economy, providing tens of thousands of direct jobs and many more support jobs, is operating at less than a third of the pace it was on before this war started. The agricultural sector is also in very bad shape, as much of the agricultural production in Israel takes place in areas close to the borders with Gaza and Lebanon, which have both been very unsettled in recent years for obvious reasons. Israel's manufacturing sector is also having trouble for a very unexpected reason. Reports emerged this week that machines Israeli companies use in assembly line fabrication, packaging, and distribution are being idled because the foreign companies from which they were purchased are refusing to honor their installation and maintenance contracts. Well, many of those companies that sold the machinery to Israeli manufacturing companies are based in Europe, where it is becoming very fashionable to be anti-Israel. Labor unions in Italy have reportedly instructed technicians not to travel to Israel to work on these machines, even if their employees ask them to. Insurance companies are refusing to give clearance to workers to come to Israel, claiming that it's a war zone, and the safety risk is way too high. Many other creative ways are being found to effectively sanction and embargo Israel, while at the same time, many Israeli tourists are reporting that they are abused and harassed when they visit Western countries. Last, but certainly not least, the internal social fabric of Israel, which obviously affects the economy, is also under terrible strain. The issue of whether or not ultra-Orthodox young men will be drafted into the IDF to serve the same way young men from other sectors of society do is one of the main points of friction. This week, large crowds of Haredi men, that's ultra-Orthodox men, gathered to protest the arrest of some who had refused to report for conscription. They gathered outside a military prison and even the home of the Attorney General in Tel Aviv. Now, the Attorney General is also under attack from other vectors this past week, as her attempts to rein in National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's attempts to exert greater power over the police than the law gives him the authority to do have drawn intense backlash. Ben-Gvir doesn't seem to think he needs to obey the law in this regard, which maybe shouldn't surprise anyone given the fact that he's been breaking the laws of this country ever since he was a teenager, and he even served time in prison for it. The point is, there's a lot of internal tension in Israel, and there's also a lot of pressure coming against us from the outside, and the economy is in very bad shape. That is why we need to continue also to pray for the leaders in Israel, including Ben-Gvir. And that is why here at Vision for Israel, we are continuing to provide assistance for families and communities in financial distress. So if you want to know more about our projects, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and please watch this short video.
For years, Vision for Israel has been hosting the Holocaust survivors and terror victims and widows and orphans and children at risk, at high risk. And of course, that after the October 7th, people were really in distress. And a lot of the Holocaust survivors, they had this kind of bad pictures from the past that would come back to them. And many of them were having to deal with their emotional state of being in depression and being not able to cope with the horrible tragedies that took place. So we initiated to inviting them again to do these musical mornings. And what we do is we bring a musician, we bring food, they're doing dancing and everything. And it's just a very light, enjoyable time. And I tell you, when they come to us, most of them are telling us that when they come, they just feel peace. They just feel joy. And they said, something is very special about your place. We just love coming to your place. Please invite us again. And it was like always repeating the same thing.
I think one of the great things about serving the Holocaust survivors is as they are getting older very quickly, 10 to 15,000 of the survivors are passing on into eternity every year. And so we owe a great debt to this generation of Holocaust survivors who we want to keep their memories, their biographies, their history alive. And when we host an event for the Holocaust survivors, I'm reminded of the words that I love so much in Job chapter 29, verse 13. It says, "The blessing of a perishing man came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy." And whenever the Holocaust survivors come, many of them who are widows and widowers, of course, are these elderly women who love to dance, who love to grab my arms and just swing me around. And I'm amazed at the energy that they have to dance and to sing and to have fun and to make the most out of life, which I think is so rewarding, such a blessing for us. We've even been able to dedicate ambulances that we donated to the service of Israel in order to make and uplift their own countenance and happy to be part of something giving back to the community. So it really is a blessing, and I think we owe the Holocaust survivors a great debt and to keep their memories alive. Now we're coming close to the end of our report, so I'll just briefly touch on some other things making headlines in Israel this week. To start with, the Lebanese National Army has begun moving into so-called pilot zones in southern Lebanon in order to deny Hezbollah access to these areas. The IDF is withdrawing from some positions in southern Lebanon in order to turn them over to the LNA. Personally, I'm not very optimistic about the trajectory this project is on, especially as Iran has already ordered their proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, to blockade Saudi oil shipments through the Bab al-Mandab Straits. After doing that, it's a short distance to them ordering Hezbollah to resume attacks on Israel. They're running out of cards, though, to play in Tehran, and Hezbollah is just one of the strongest cards they have left. In other news, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani made noises this week about wanting to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he travels to New York in a few months for the UN General Assembly meeting. The basis for this arrest would be a warrant issued for Netanyahu by the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Although the United States, of which New York City is a part, even if Zohran Mamdani doesn't seem to be aware of that fact, is not a signatory to the ICC convention. Netanyahu dismissed Mamdani's statements as a political stunt meant to divert attention from his own failed policies, and President Trump also stepped in and declared that Netanyahu would not be arrested in any way, shape, or form whatsoever when he arrives in the United States. Friends, there is so much I could say about this ridiculous situation, but once again, I need to watch my own health and let you have some good news. So let's just read once more. Isaiah chapter 3, verse 4. "I will make mere youths their officials. Children will rule over them." Zohran Mamdani is a spectacular example of what's being described in this verse, and that's all I have to say about it for now, because I want to continue the tradition of ending these news reports with some good news, and here it is. Colombia's new president-elect, Abelardo de la Espriella, has vowed to fully restore relations with Israel and open an embassy in Jerusalem. Bravo! I thank you so much. Slovenia's newly elected government has made a similar announcement. I look forward to being there when both embassies are opened in the near future. And with that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another episode of VFI News from Israel. Shalom, shalom.